Good morning or good evening, depending on whereabouts you are in the world, to this strategic conversation with Nigel Topping, a character who will become even more well known in the year to come as he is the high-level ambassador, the climate champion for the COP next year, appointed by the UK government. He'll be in conversation with me in the for the next 45 minutes or so. But before I say anything more and to invite him to chat with me, let me say a few words about the rules of engagement for this morning's 45 minutes. Those of you who are Zoom savvy, you'll know, make sure your video's on, your name's there, and you're muted. Should you wish to ask a question or raise a query, please use your virtual hand. Those of you who don't know where it is, go to the icon where it says participants and then click on that and you'll find your virtual hand. I also want to warmly welcome those on live stream who are joining us also today, and you're not left out. Should you wish to raise a question, query, or air your frustration, please use the hashtag Africa Europe Debate, and we'll take your question and or query. Also, to be noted that those of you who are on Zoom and engaging in this, please do stay muted, as I said, because that will make it clear for me. But also, if you're using your virtual hand, I'll be able to bring you in accordingly. Okay, without further ado, I want to move on to our conversation. This takes place at a particular juncture, both for the partners and communities that have been involved in creating something called the Africa Europe Foundation, a brand new, bold ambition to really think through differently and better how two very large markets, communities, historical entities are able to work together in a very different way to create an ambition and an outcome that is different from the past. And that's the Africa Europe Foundation, which was launched a week ago. And part of that has been a series of discussions over the past few months, and this particularly in the past 7 days, which are about debating Africa and EU relations. Today is a culmination of those discussions where today we'll be focusing on climate and climate action, and this evening, or later on this afternoon, we'll be launching the very first output from this foundation, which is the Climate Action Report. So it's fitting to be having this conversation with Nigel this morning to set a broader context for what takes place over the next year, but also the next 2 years. So let's not forget that as the baton passes from one nation to the other on the COP series of debates, Nigel will be working with the future climate action champion from Africa, as Africa will be hosting the next COP in 2022. Firstly, let me give a warm welcome to Nigel. Nigel, hello.
Morning, Dharmendra. Lovely to see you.
You too, you too. It's interesting, that the context for this conversation is such that we've got Boris coming to town. I'm not going to tax you on that, by the way, as I know you're a cabinet appointee, but we won't go there. But we will talk about the implications of Brexit potentially on the role that you will be playing and working with in terms of a very significant ambassador role, Nigel, in terms of bringing sectors, communities to work in a collaborative fashion and work through a ambitious agenda, which has been there from the start of this whole process with the COP process. And I want to start with asking you first a sort of a personal question, if I may, Nigel, in terms of what has this appointment meant for you? You've been working on this agenda, you've changed route in certain ways, you're from the private sector, if I say it broadly, but when you got the call from the Cabinet Office to say, you're the man for us, what did you feel and what did it mean for you and your ambitions?
Well, I mean, I'm deeply honoured. It's funny, sometimes I was asked if I would take this role just before Christmas last year. I was formally appointed in February, but it took me about a nanosecond to say yes. Because sometimes you get asked to do things and everything feels, honestly, I felt like everything I've worked towards in the last 30 years of my life has been preparing me to do this role. So I feel a real honor because it's a big role and a huge sense of responsibility because it's a big problem. But I also feel like I've been, as I say, preparing for this forever. I've throughout my career in different aspects of my life, I've been drawn to leadership positions, but I very deeply believe in the power of collaboration, whether it's in teams in sports or or teams on a mountain,
Mm-hmm.
or teams in a business, or collaborating across these sort of vast systemic
Mm-hmm.
challenges now. So, and yes, I feel so honoured and a sense of responsibility. Also excited that actually I feel like that I am ready and I can really make a difference. Um, so it's a mixture of those kind of emotions: honoured,
Okay.
responsible, and
Yeah.
excited.
Good
I would
to
say.
know. Good, and I think it's important for the people that are watching to get the person behind the label and the leadership position, because that says a lot about you. I mean, you brought together a significant collaboration of the We Mean Business. Now, how has that informed of a term that you are associated with already, Nigel, which is radical collaboration? What does that mean?
Well, there's a famous scene in the Monty Python film The Life of Brian when several very small, what we might call activist NGOs,
Hmm.
are arguing in the Colosseum about minute differences between their theories of change or their positions in the world in the face of trying to overcome the oppressive might of the Roman Empire. So, I mean, fundamentally, radical collaboration means two things. One, never lose sight of the mission and fall into the petty squabblings that movements often fall into. Um, uh, and so retain that very bold ambition and sight of what it is we're trying to do. I mean, what we're trying to do here is nothing less than the complete transformation of the global economic system and the energy sources that it relies on. I mean, it's a massive undertaking, so we should never forget that and let our personal or organizational egos lead. They're always there, and they're a force. There's a will to power and a will to act, but they shouldn't when they start to lead. And the other thing, so in a way, the radical bit is about being very bold, but also about really valuing the diversity of different approaches. And so with We Mean Business, I'd been working at the Carbon Disclosure Project, which is one of the founding members of the We Mean Business Coalition. So We Mean Business is a coalition of 7 core partners, but many, many more, all working with the business community to drive ambition and action on climate change. And historically, they had often ended up behaving like those little NGOs in the Colosseum in The Life of Brian, and kind of sniping at each other and being more competitive with each other than with the system that they were trying to change. So taking the helm of that collaboration was both an opportunity but also a huge learning experience, because organizations that I hadn't actually known that well before and had maybe been privately critical of, I grew to appreciate that actually they were all very good at some things that others weren't very good at, and learning what everyone's good at allowed us to play to each other's strengths and collectively be much, much more impactful. And in many ways, the role I've got now is like taking the Women Business experience, but on a broader platform globally and in terms of different stakeholders as well.
Indeed, and you couldn't have been appointed at a more challenging time. I mean, you couldn't have, thought, my goodness, we have a crisis which is both financial and health. We've got Brexit, UK moving out, what's seen as being, a hugely political, momentous occasion for all the wrong reasons, one might say. And there you are, having to champion this kind of global role to take us forward. So, I mean, the context for this conversation, as I said in the early part of the introduction, is about a relationship between two continents that want to work differently and towards a mutual and shared ambition for change for people in communities. And before I ask you about the approach you take to various continents, but in particular in our interest is Africa, say a little bit about the framework you're working towards in terms of what we can expect as the UK leading COP next year. What's your framework of both ambition, but the priorities you're going to establish? Because if you can reveal those now, it'll be helpful to people to understand how they coalesce around you.
Yeah, first of all, Dharmendra, I should explain a little bit the nuance of my role, because although I'm appointed by the UK Prime Minister, the mandate for my role actually comes from the parties to the UN Convention. So
Indeed.
I'm not a spokesperson and I don't sit in the UK government. Obviously, I work very closely with them, but my mandate comes from all of the countries who are parties to the UN Climate Convention, who created the role of high-level champion in order to, alongside the multilateral negotiation process, to drive what the UN system calls a non-state actors, so businesses, investors, cities, states and regions. So, and I work with Gonzalo Munoz, who's the Chilean high-level champion. So
Indeed.
there's always two. Anyone
You
so as
handed
you
on the
say,
baton, yes.
I'll work alongside an African champion after COP26. So my framing is slightly different from the UK government's framing, but so the government has to, the presidency has to deliver the negotiated process, which is very complex and technical, and has a consensus requirement for decisions. So that's the sort of number one job of the presidency. Of course, the UK government then has also got to demonstrate leadership in the world, which is why its recent announcement of a 68% reduction by 2030 is very welcome. And
Indeed.
Some of the details of that are coming out, like phasing out combustion engines in 2030. It's one of my favorites. I've been working on that for the last 7-8 years.
Yes.
And the UK also has some specific campaigns around accelerating the energy transition, which is accelerated phase out of coal in particular, zero emission vehicles, finance, resilience, and nature-based solutions. My role working with Gonzalo and working with something which was born in Africa, the Marrakesh Partnership in COP22, which was in Marrakesh the year after Paris, when the first two champions, Laurence Toubiana from France and Hakim El Fayed from Morocco, said we need to give a name to this community of non-state actors like We Mean Business, like the C40 Cities Group or ICLEI, and many others, several hundred partners we work with. So Gonzalo and I work with that community, and the framing that has evolved over time. But Gonzalo last year with that community created a new bit of framing, which is really important, called these climate action pathways. So we now have these race to zero pathways, which for every sector, there's a pathway of what do the main actors need to do to get us to zero before 2050. We're just publishing version 2 of those actually this weekend alongside the Ambition Summit.
Okay.
So our framing is we have this big campaign, Race to Zero, we get as many people as possible to commit to net zero. Then we have these sectoral pathways, which are in more detail. We're trying to get critical masses of businesses, cities, governments to commit to those pathways. And we're just about to launch a sister campaign called Race to Resilience, which will look in particular at what needs to be done to work with those communities most vulnerable to climate change to make their lives and livelihoods more resilient.
Okay, let's put that now into through a focus or a lens on Africa. Share with us the approach you're going to be taking in relation to not only thinking about the next year or the next 2 years, but also the context of the kind of relationship you're hoping that this agenda will have to one of the world's most contentious, highly fought over, sought after continents, but also one which has the opportunity to be a game changer for the globe. When you think about the young youth population, when you think about the diversity of the climate agenda, and a continent that's often having to bear the consequences of something it didn't actually create.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I should say I'm really thrilled to see this Africa-Europe Foundation coming into life, because as you described, really, in many ways, that relationship between Africa and Europe, I mean, it's hardly in microcosm because that's a big chunk of the world, right? But is I think represents that asymmetry at the heart of the challenge of climate change, that asymmetry of cause and effect. So I think if Europe and Africa can crack that, then that's really hopeful for the world, and it does need a reset. So I'd like to thank all the organisers for pulling this together, and I actually want to call out Camilla Toulmin from IED for bringing me into this conversation, because I have spent small bits of time in Africa, in Morocco and in Zambia and Kenya and South Africa, but I've never worked in Africa, so I don't have a kind of lived experience that I can draw on, or a strong personal network. But it is very clear to me, and of course Gonzalo is from the global south, but Chile is very different from Africa.
Absolutely.
So it's very clear to me that we will not solve the huge challenge of climate change unless we dive into this asymmetry in the way that you are with this Africa-Europe dialogue and foundation. And so a couple of observations that I've made in the first sort of 6 months on the job. One is that when we organise only at a global level, then there's a huge structural bias towards the global north. So when I get 100 people together around the Marrakesh Partnership, even though many of them are global organisations, they're mostly based in Geneva or London or Washington. So the mindset, the sensitivity, the life experience isn't global. You know, you can't fake that, right? I mean, the fact that I have not spent years of my life in Africa means I will never have that lived experience, right? So the first realization is that we have to address that balance. So Gonzalo and I have committed to making that at least a 50-50 north-south balance in the overall Marrakesh Partnership in the next 2 years. Second observation is you really need to go more regional, because context really matters. You know, culturally, linguistically. You know, I'm personally looking forward to doing a lot more work in Francophone Africa. My wife's French Canadian, so I'm a fan of some of the more interesting French accents that you hear in Africa and in Quebec. But so we're realizing, so we've been doing it, and we're doing quite a lot of listening to try and understand what's happening in Africa. What are African organisations doing? What are the nuances and differences? We're very conscious, as you said, that the next COP presidency, and therefore the champion who I will work with, will come from an as yet undefined African country. So we're very keen to, you know, historically the role has come with very few resources. So we've been very entrepreneurial in building up a team, but it's mainly South America and Europe, because that's where Gonzalo and I come from. So we're very keen to extend the platform that we've built into Africa ahead of the African presidency, so that by the time there's an African presidency and champion, we're building a global presence with local capability. So we'd love to talk to anybody here who's got ideas or who can help us think through and implement.
So that was just a pause. Those of you on Zoom, you heard that. Here's an opportunity to engage and support Nigel in his role. And from the, you know, for whatever ideas you have, I do encourage you, put your virtual hand up if you want to engage, but also use the Zoom chat. The Zoom chat function is fantastic. And, you know, if I don't get around to asking the question, don't worry, Nigel will answer it later. I can assure you, we will. It's on the Zoom chat. So please make the opportunity a real one for you as someone who's going to be leading this charge as of next year. So any ideas, please put your hand up. But carry on. Sorry, Nigel.
Well, I think that's it really. You know, in Paris, everyone was focused on securing a global deal, and in Glasgow, we're going to have the first test of that global deal in terms of, can we finish the negotiations? Our country's going to come forward, and we're going to learn a lot on Saturday, right, with this Ambition Summit. But the political tailwinds are good now. We have well over 100 countries saying they're going to commit to 100%. Of course, we have China, South Korea, Japan recently upping their game, and then an incoming presidency in America that's going to come back into the Paris Agreement, and then the UK and the EU also leading the charge. So I think the political tailwinds are good. But what we're really trying to do, Gonzalo and I, with all of our partners, is really make sure that COP26 is the first COP that's really about implementation.
Yes.
So we're bringing the sense of momentum and practicality, and those collaborations between cities and businesses and national ministers who are between them, making the changes we need to accelerate in a way that we know we can and are starting to see.
That's really good to hear, Nigel, because for many, and when I think about the ordinary person on the street, you know, everyone refers to and invokes the ordinary person on the street, but it matters because this agenda is intimately about people, communities, and localities behaving differently and demanding differently, and wishing greater accountability from their political leaders to actually do the right thing, rather than simply have their hand tied, you know, behind their back with their fingers crossed about, yes, I'm really doing it, but I'm not, if you like. What will you do to create a very different, if that is your ambition, a different atmosphere around COP next year, where you get a sense of a people-powered approach and community civil society organizations being much more at the heart? Because I've been moderating a lot of our Debating Africa discussions, and you know, one of the issues has been about people from all over Africa feeling not listened to, not connected, or having ideas, being entrepreneurial, not being able to have access to finance to really power some of their ideas, but most importantly, having that sense of engagement and voice. Is that something you're going to hopefully do something about?
Well, I mean, we're trying. I mean, first of all, I don't think that's I don't think that's a uniquely African experience.
Indeed,
right?
Of course not. Absolutely,
I think throughout the world, there's often a sense that there are of overwhelm that things are happening that people have no agency over. But I would say that I do think that's changing. And the sort of rise of the political voice of a younger generation has changed the politics around the world. And of course, you and listeners will know the figures better than I, but I am very conscious that Africa is a very, very young continent, right? I think the sort of median age is sort of 19 or 20.
Indeed.
Which means someone like me, age 55, is very much an elder in an African sense, and it means that people aged 15 and 16 who maybe don't vote yet are at the demographic heart of the whole continent. So their voice is even more politically important than it might be in Europe, say. I think so. A couple of things. First of all, to really recognize that diversity of voice is important. So 2 examples of some things that we've been doing, which we're encouraged by. We have a very good partnership with an organisation called Future Stewards and the TED, which most people will know of. And we partnered in October on an event called Countdown, which is all about trying to raise awareness of the science of climate change and the solutions. And I think, all of that's available on the website if you go to TED, if you just Google TED Countdown. And we really fought hard to make sure that was a genuinely globally diverse, so across geography, across gender, across stakeholder groups. So we had, cultural icons, scientists, youth activists, indigenous leaders, business leaders, government ministers. So very, very diverse, to try and create much more of a sense that this is the whole of society grappling with and moving towards a zero carbon future. And then about a month ago, when the COP would have been between the 9th and 19th of November, with nearly 100 partners, Gonzalo and I and the team curated what we called the Race to Zero dialogues, and again worked very hard on diversity across the different dimensions. Interestingly, one of the things that COVID has actually allowed us to do, ironically, is to accelerate our learning about how to be more inclusive by working more virtually. So that's something that we will really work to continue, so that in Glasgow there will be a physical presence there, but we'll be looking to make sure there's much more opportunities for millions to dial in and get involved. And as I say, also we're looking to see how we can regionalize the work as well, so that because I say, there's a limit to what you can do with it if you only ever have a global conversation, because context really matters.
Absolutely. And one of the things that occurs to me is that we have had, as you said, Africa, 60% of the population is under 25 and growing, right? So you're talking about if we do things properly, and if Africa gets this right too, but is supported, you're going to create there's going to be the largest population growth everywhere in the world, the most significant rise in urbanization, as you can imagine. So that's going to be either an opportunity or one of those things that will actually affect negatively climate change. So cities, as you know, urbanization across the world is one of the biggest challenges that we have in terms of how do you make our cities and support our cities to be greener, and those who are emerging to be greener, to learn from it. When you think about the kind of issues that you're going to focus on, I think it would be interesting for people here in this audience to know that, what are the 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 things that you think are the big accelerators in the next 5 years on this agenda? And it could be a personal comment from you, or what you think, what are those 2 or 3 things that will really, provide the steroids that we need, or the kind of accelerators behind, so that we move? Because Nigel, you know as well as I do that the naysayers are still thinking that, the uncanny weather that we're having and that we've been having in the past 2 years is just, it's just getting hotter, that's all. But we know global temperatures are accelerating beyond our wildest imaginations. And we'll look at it today here in Belgium. It's warm, it shouldn't be. And we've had the hottest autumn and summer in history on record. And it's only going to get worse next year. So we need to do something fast and bold on a number of levels. So I know it's a challenging question, but if you were to say pick, what are those things that you think the global community, the private sector, public sector, should really focus their minds on?
Yeah, and again, with the caveat that I'm aware of my lack of deep understanding of an African
No, indeed,
context.
absolutely, yeah.
My sense is that it's something like, I mean, I if anything, I don't worry about those sort of people who are denying climate change. I mean, they really are dinosaurs,
Yeah.
right? And science and the markets and the politics are rapidly catching up with them, and it's becoming an electoral issue because you can't hide from the tripling of the severe weather events that we've had, and is locked in, right? That's not going to go backwards. We're going to have to live with that. I think that I kind of break it into three things. I think there's areas, particularly energy and transport, where we know the solutions and we just have to stop wasting money in the dirty old technologies of coal and combustion engines and really accelerate. Now, that's really important in Africa, is that we don't end up with Africa being used as the dumping ground for old technology, so that all of the secondhand cars, combustion engine cars from Europe, end up spending another 20 years on the road in Africa. So that's a big challenge, but we know the solution. So the challenge is, and those are profitable solutions microeconomically and macroeconomically. So that's a question of how do we mobilize the capital to build the infrastructure and mobilize the political will to make the changes, to make sure that Africa has a leapfrog and doesn't follow Europe 20, 30 years behind and exacerbate problems of air pollution and climate change and all the pulmonary health issues. So that's one about deploying at scale. And every time people think about the future, in these areas they get it wrong on the pessimistic side. I keep saying people, in 2016 the International Energy Agency said that we'll still be relying on combustion engine cars well into the 2070s. More and more countries now are banning combustion engine car sales from 2030. So the future's come forward 40 years.
Indeed.
We need to make sure that future comes forward 40 years in Africa as well, as and in renewables as well. I think the second area, and I'm glad you mentioned it, cities. I mean, I think the mayors of the world have a newly found political confidence, particularly coming from this issue of climate change. So I think it's, and given both the rate of population growth, the rate of urbanization, and the levels of urban poverty, I think that the city has a real nexus of accelerated change. I think there's something like 1 billion slum dwellers in the world, right? Those are amongst the most vulnerable lives in the face of extreme weather events, because if you're living in a informal settlement, then your exposure to too much water or too little water or hurricanes is much greater than if you're living in a bricks and mortar dwelling. And actually, I think because of the rise of the voice and the collective of mayors around the world, across the north-south, just as I think if you look at an organisation like C40 or ICLEI, these big coalitions of mayors, they're partnering very well across north-south dimensions in the way that the Africa-Europe Foundation is. So I'm quite hopeful about cities, but it needs a real focus. The third area, which I think is particularly important to Africa, is farming. And again, depends whose numbers you think, but between 2 and 3 billion people in the world are reliant on smallholder farming for their livelihoods. Many of them don't have access to banking, to insurance, to extension services. Many of them are still malnourished. So I think that's a really tricky knot, though, right? Because that is not just, whereas the energy transition, a lot of it's around substituting one technology for another. What we need to do collectively to provide resilient livelihoods for smallholder farmers around the world, and I think particularly in Africa, is very complex, because it's about all of the different political dimensions. It's about technology, it's about economy, it's about gender, it's about land rights, it's about indigenous rights, it's about infrastructure. If people don't have roads and access to refrigeration, then it's much harder to or digital access or insurance products. So I think that's probably in that order. Those are the three big ones, but that's also in order of what's, if you like, none of them are easy, but they get harder as you go down my list.
Exactly, absolutely. Thank you for being so frank around that, because I know that there are a lot of people who have got their own take on what they think should be the big thing on this agenda, and that's good, actually. But there's something about the fact that because time is running out, literally, on this agenda, we need to find forces and pathways of acceleration. I'm glad that you set out those three. And this afternoon, if you're able to, or people that support you or involved in you, will see what we're doing. We'll be launching our climate action report this afternoon, and the approach there has been to think about what are the accelerators for change on climate action in the context of the Africa-EU relation. I want to bring in a couple of people. You've all been incredibly quiet. I can see on Zoom. This is unlike you guys and girls. I will pick on you if you're not going to come forward. What I will do is I can see Frederick Muya. Frederick, can I pick on you? Excellent.
Okay.
Please
Thank you very
introduce
much for
yourself.
giving me this opportunity.
Yes.
Yeah, Frederick Muya. I'm from the Jobs for Africa Foundation. We are about creating opportunities for the youthful population of Africa that you and Nigel referred to. And we insist on building value chains, skills development, not only the skills that are required today, but since we are talking about climate change, the skills of the future, because the world of work is going to change a lot because of the transitions we are talking about. And most importantly, entrepreneurship. I am from Kenya, a country that recently discovered oil, and I feel that Africa is in some sort of dilemma. How do you say to a country like Kenya that recently discovered oil that, look, and everyone especially in the Turkana area, very dry area, that everyone is seeing opportunity, and then you're telling them, no, the focus is not going to be on fossil fuels, we need to transition to clean energy. And as you said, Africa has always been a victim of climate change for reasons or for activities that were carried out elsewhere. So Nigel did talk about energy, transport, and I would also say manufacturing with the new African Continental Free Trade Area. Everyone is talking about manufacturing.
Yes.
So the question is, as we try to catch up with other countries, how do you tell us not to, sort of follow what other countries have gone through? I think it's some sort of dilemma, and you need some sort of incentives. I don't know. It is.
It's a tough one, Frederick, and I'm so glad you brought it up, because I think the point behind the oil issue that you raise is one that strikes at the heart of this relationship, where Africa feels as if, you're telling us to bypass certain, gold and opportunities just because you guys and girls have made the world more polluted. But now we have to forego stuff and actually do it our way rather than your way. And it's something that will run through this dynamic, I think, for the years to come. But rather than the finger pointing, we need to find solutions and pathways. As you say, what are the incentives? I will bring Nigel into this, because it's a tough one, and he can't answer this by himself, but it'd be good to think about the tone he might set for the debates that happen next year in response to what you're saying. Leah, can I bring you in? You have no camera on. Thank you very much, Frederick. Leah, you need to put your camera on.
Hello. Yes, I'm sorry, I don't have a camera available at the moment.
Okay, no worries.
But
introduce yourself.
I did want to say thanks for starting off this discussion. And my question would be, what can you do as COP26 champion for climate action to get the ball rolling on finance to address loss and damage? As you'll have seen, the UK is pushing an adaptation and resilience narrative for COP26, and is including loss and damage within this. However, loss and damage is a separate article in the Paris Agreement and has a mechanism under the UNFCCC, the Warsaw International Mechanism on Loss and Damage, whilst resilience is an objective. It's a necessary objective, but it's an objective that is separate to loss and damage and is not a separate article or a mechanism. And as such, finance to address loss and damage must be a clearly separate discussion point of the post-2025 climate finance discussions that are due to start at COP26. The existing 100 billion climate finance goal ends this year, but COP21 extended that goal to 2025, and what we're seeing is that there's barely any finance to address loss and damage, particularly post loss and damage. So what plans do you have to work on
Leah.
setting up and implementing a finance mechanism to address losses and damages?
Leah, would you please also say where you're from, who you represent?
Yes, sorry. My name is Leah Achempong. I'm the Senior Policy and Advocacy Officer on Climate Finance at Eurodad, the European Network on Debt and Development.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that. Robert, I'm going to move to you. Robert?
Yes. Thank you very much.
Hello, Robert.
My question is related.
Just introduce yourself very briefly for the sake of the audience.
I would like to say that I think it's great that, Nigel, you will be championing this race to zero to advance mitigation objectives. But it's going to be equally important to champion a race to 100 billion annually for the Green Climate Fund in order to support adaptation efforts. And adaptation efforts today, we shouldn't get behind the ball on adaptation the same way we got behind the ball on mitigation. If we don't get, very forcefully engaged in adaptation efforts and fund them in a major way today, then we're going to have to face very big loss and damage costs in the future. And that's not the ideal situation. The ideal situation is to be proactive and to do something today for adaptation, especially for Africa, where losses will be very high.
Sure.
Unless we adapt.
Okay, Robert.
What can you do to also support a race to 100 billion annually?
Yeah, Robert. Just say which organization you're representing.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm from the UNCTAD, which is the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development in Geneva, and we work with African countries on a number of green economy and climate change issues.
Okay, great. I mean, on the Zoom chat, because I'm running out of time, unfortunately. You've all suddenly kind of decided to engage in the last 7 minutes of this conversation. And so I'm not going to have an opportunity to bring all of you in, I'm afraid, but do put your comments on the Zoom chat. But the question you're raising is an important one, because in the context of the fact that we are globally in the biggest public sector debt we'll have on history, on the record books. So I think that's going to be a tough question for Nigel to come back on both those questions about loss and damage and the race to 100 billion. Salim, it's good to have you here. Welcome, Salim. Please briefly introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Salim Fakir. I have engaged with Nigel before, so I'm from the African Climate Foundation. I'm going to try to be very brief, Nigel, because I'm running out of time. But you talked about asymmetry, and I think you've reflected effectively historical burdens, and that Africa has been vulnerable to climate change as a result of human-made industrial development. But there is another asymmetry that will evolve, and I think it's fair to say, and it might, in my view, it requires a complete rethink of the Paris Agreement as well, in terms of how it deals with this. We are in the throes of, I think, fundamental tectonic shifts in terms of structural shifts happening in Europe, China, presumably in Europe, in the US. And these are going to create a new wave of technological developments that are going to be disruptive. And again, once again, Africa is going to be vulnerable to these technological disruptions. And in particular, other kinds of instruments being introduced in trade, standards, and other market mechanisms that will restrict goods and services flowing from Africa into Europe or anywhere else in the world, where decarbonization effectively is also a barrier for economic development. So I think that when we talk about the race to zero, particularly in Africa, I think we have to be cautious that there's going to have to be a lot of other kinds of support given, particularly to developing countries who are going to be subject to these massive new waves of technological disruption because of structural shifts in these other economies. And in the next decade, I think that's going to be quite visible. So I just want to alert you to that, and I just would like your response to that. Thanks.
Thank you, Salim, for joining us. Right, I have to now move into the kind of final few minutes of this strategic conversation with you, Nigel. Nigel, do you want to come back to some of the points about the money question, the loss and damage, the creating the 100 billion fund, but also what Salim's just pointed to of a different type of asymmetry. Nigel, back to you. You're on mute.
That's okay. The controller muted me. I'm rarely voluntarily mute. So Leah and Robert raised very important questions, but the first thing I have to do is just to remind you that I have no role in the negotiations. So both the 100 billion and the loss and damage are issues between sovereign states, and they're really important because they're about the context and the trust in the negotiations. So I don't want to diminish their importance, but that's not my mandate. In fact, my mandate is expressly not to work on those. So whilst recognising that they're really important, that's something that the Secretariat and the UK presidency have to work on. To your specific point, so we are launching a race to resilience because we recognise that there is this asymmetry, also a focus on mitigation. And you could say that we've contributed to that by launching the race to zero first, right? And it's got lots of momentum. So we're launching a race to resilience, and we're putting lives and livelihoods at the heart of that. And there are vulnerable lives and livelihoods everywhere in the world. But again, the asymmetry says that most of the most vulnerable lives and livelihoods are in the global south, many of them in Africa. So we're deliberately launching this race for resilience. And it's going to be kind of announced on Saturday at the Climate Ambition Summit, but will be formally launched at the Climate Adaptation Summit, I think, on the 25th of January. And we're going to try and use the office of the high-level champions to raise the profile of and the level of energy and the level of money flowing towards resilience. But specifically to your point about a race to 100 billion, actually, I'm going to be provocative, Rob, and say I fundamentally disagree that we should have a race to the 100 billion. So let me explain that. I don't disagree that the 100 billion is really important and it needs to be delivered, right? That will be contentious because it was created in a grey way and it will be delivered in a grey way. And different people disagree with the OECD analysis. The reason I say that I'm not going to focus on the 100 billion is A, it's not my mandate, but B, it's not the 100 billion that the world needs. It's not the 100 billion that the most vulnerable need. It's trillions. So I think we need a race to trillions. But I think we need to start more with what needs to happen. So that it's a wrong end of the pipe. Focusing on the 100 billion. So again, I'm not trying to diminish that or say that's not important, but it's important because it's a commitment that was made and needs to be delivered. But what's really important is that lives and livelihoods that are vulnerable become less vulnerable, and that's going to require trillions. And that won't be the 100 billion being scaled up. It will be, how do we invest in the sort of leapfrog changes, by the way, which East Africa, for example, has led on. I mean, my experience of the way that M-Pesa, the mobile money and mobile banking took off in East Africa, way ahead of Europe and North America, right? So let's please kill the idea that all technology flows north to south, and that every technological change is a barrier to the south. Sometimes it can be a real advantage to leapfrog and avoid expensive, stranded, dirty assets. So I think we need to really focus on, okay, let's take Africa. What's the investment that's needed to deliver the transformations in power, in transport, in cities, in agriculture, and where will that come from? Some of that will come from the multilateral money. Much of it in those areas of power and transport will come from the private sector because those are profitable. So how do we actually construct the full stack of capital to deliver the full range? So that's why I would say let's have a race to trillions, not a race to 100 billion. I think actually the over focus on the negotiations and the 100 billion and the language of negotiations, I think often acts as an anchor to talking about the full change that needs to happen. Others will disagree with me, but it's an observation that I make personally. Just to quickly reply to Frederick and Salim. Frederick, you raise a real, it's a real dilemma, right? I don't have a clever answer to that. I think the one, I don't know if one thought I have is to beware the resource curse is well known, it's well documented, and just beware investing in yesterday's technology and getting locked into that and missing the opportunities to leapfrog. But we have that issue is very real. It's as real in Germany, where you have the whole debate over phasing out coal and many people working in coal. It's as real in the North Sea in Scotland, where you have an oil industry. So that's not a uniquely Kenyan dilemma. It's a dilemma everywhere where people have fossil fuel resources that they're exploiting now, but which the world cannot afford to be exploited in the long term, and which won't be exploited in the medium term, as we very, very, very quickly see this race to the zero carbon economy being adopted by political leaders everywhere. I mean, Salim, I mean, I think that's a longer conversation about technology disruption. I do think, Salim, that it's also really important that we try and think about where technology disruption can be an advantage to developing economies. Indeed. Because they haven't got the sunk costs of an old. I mean, if you drive around America now, there's a lot of very tired old infrastructure. So tired old roads, tired old cabling, and all of that's going to have to be replaced. If you can leapfrog that, then maybe there's a macroeconomic advantage. I don't know, but it's complicated. I understand the point you're making. I think particularly to do with farming, which is one reason why I would say that it would be great to see farming be really at the heart of the Africa-Europe dialogue and foundation, because it seems to me asymmetries in farming trade is probably one of the things that, if that could be unlocked, would make the most difference to a resetting of the relationship.
Indeed. Nigel, I know we've only got a couple of minutes left now, but just a moment, a word or two on what people can expect early next year from you. In terms of what are the ways in which people can engage. There is obviously a well-trodden path in terms of the ambassadors and, the climate champions and the role they play. But in the context of, a vaccine in place, there'll be a different kind of atmosphere. And I say that deliberately because you are taking on this mantle in one of the most difficult circumstances. What can people expect? So what can we, and those who are in this audience, who are very much connected to the Africa Europe Foundation activity. So we've launched it a week ago. A report will come out this afternoon, which I hope that you will have an opportunity to read. And actually, I think it will speak to some of the points you're making this morning, and that it could hopefully guide some of the thinking. What can we do to help, and how?
Well, keep challenging and critiquing things that I say and things that we're doing. It's really welcome, right? I think we're launching these decarbonisation pathways version 2 on Saturday, so engage with them and critique them and tell us which of them work in an African context and which of them need a sort of regional variant. I know in some cases, like on the built environment, the World Green Building Council has done some really good work on decarbonisation pathways that are different for different continents, recognising the local context. So one, will be engaged with the pathways. Secondly, we will launch the Race to Resilience in January. So engage in that, and the idea there will be to really ramp up. It won't be to. What we're trying to do is use the office to highlight the need for and some of the great work that's already going on in an attempt to help to scale it up rather than try and duplicate. We will be having more dialogues with African partners and African leaders to help us inform our thinking, and as we seek to set up a team which would be embedded in African partners in Africa next year, and I'll be doing whatever I can to. I don't think I've got any sort of formal power to really drive the race to trillions, but I do think
of course not. Yes,
it's something I'll probably be more vocal on, and I do hope that with sort of newly multilateral USA, and with the UK having the presidency of the G7 and Italy of the G20, so very serendipitous, right? That the presidents of the G7 and G20 are also the co-presidents of the COP.
Exactly.
That this issue of the need for a global green recovery rather than a northern green recovery will be one at the heart of those multilateral processes.
Absolutely. It's like, whilst the context for your role couldn't be worse in terms of adversity, the stars have aligned to a certain extent, especially in terms of, a new government in the US and other things that have fallen into place to a certain extent, which I suppose bodes well, potentially, in terms of reviving multilateralism. And I think that's a huge lever for you in the role, ambassadorial role you play. just one of the things that, on the money issue, just a personal point from ourselves, for myself, is that I don't think it's about how much money, it's about how it's spent. I think the world is sloshing around with dosh. It's just not spent in the right way, and hope that you're able to shine some light on that. And any last thoughts on that? Digital. From our Debating Africa series, we know that Africa is brimming with technology-savvy individual entrepreneurs who are doing the most incredible things, that they just need the power to their elbow through means which could actually transform agriculture, cities. And obviously, the question of oil has to be addressed head on, I think, for many nations, not only Kenya, but elsewhere. So there's the money, digital, and obviously the oil question. But final words from you, but also let us know how we get in touch with you in terms of, we want to obviously bag your time next year at some point. The Africa Europe Foundation would like to have you back and speak to and engage in a debate like this, let's say in the first quarter of next year, so we can see how you're getting on, but also we have thousands of people that is enjoying from Africa into this conversation. It'll be good to have you interact with them. But your final words, your message, but also how people get in touch with you in that context of where's your office?
Yeah, well, Fiona, who's based in Nairobi and is active on the chat now. Fiona, why don't you just share your email address, and Fiona can be the focal point for any African colleagues who want to get in touch with us. I completely agree with you, Dharmendra, that it's not just the amount; it's what it's spent on. But it's both, right? Because there's a lot that needs to be spent, but it needs to be spent wisely. And one thing I would say, I just encourage you, don't. If you spend your time trying to lobby me on the nuances of the negotiation and loss and damage, you'll be wasting your energy. I don't have any authority over that. It's not my mandate. What I'm trying to whereas, for example, the Great Green Wall, I see Elvis has just put something there. Absolutely, the sort of thing where we can help bring non-state actors from around the world and in the region together behind some of those initiatives. An AFR 100 and other some great initiatives that Fiona's pointing to. And on digital, I absolutely agree, and this is where I think there's a really exciting opportunities. In fact, I did some work for the Rockefeller Foundation when I was last in Kenya quite a while ago, but it was on a program of how could we use digital employment as a development vector in Africa. And of course, there are lots of very smart, very entrepreneurial people in Africa. So let's see if we can work together to find the ways to leapfrog using some of those technologies. Also, let's make sure those technologies are being made available to all those farmers, right? Because of course they have huge empowering impact on smallholder farmers if they can be made accessible to that really important communities I've described. So, and I know we're at the end, or even a little bit over, but it's been really a pleasure, and I know we've only scraped the surface of the questions. So, we'll remain in contact. I'm really committed to building more of a regional flavour to the work, but particularly, I think we need to do that in other regions, but because of the particular importance of Africa globally, and because the next COP president is going to be there, and I will be working with an African champion, I'm going to be leaning into working with African partners in particular next year. So thank you for the chance to be
Nigel,
part of this
thank you. It's been great. It's been a real pleasure. I want to thank our Zoom participants, but also our live stream ones, because actually, without you being present, this would be meaningless. It would just be Nigel and I having a quick chat. But it's been great that you've been participating and making this worthwhile. But Nigel, thank you for being so generous with your time and being so frank. I can assure all those people, this wasn't scripted. This was simply a conversation, which I hope that you found energizing, engaging, and informative. Thank you, Nigel, and I look forward to welcoming you back, and the Africa Europe Foundation will look forward to having another occasion to chat to you, and I hope that we're able to have another moderated session early next year. And all I can say to everyone here is thank you very much for your time and energy. Obviously, log on this afternoon to the launch of our Climate Action Report. You just go onto our website. It's happening at 2:30 p.m. this afternoon, and the report will be made live. So thank you all very much. Take care. Stay safe and mind your distance. And Nigel, thank you very much. And what I can say, I can see that you're going to be someone who's going to be eating and breathing this 24/7. And why wouldn't you? It's a lifetime opportunity. Power to your elbow and good luck to you. And see you again very soon. Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.